Um, Good morning, everyone. We will begin this symposium on the special issue organized by the European Accounting Review on literature reviews. So, my name is Hervé Stolevy. I'm the editor of the journal, but I'm here not as editor, but I'm here as a co-guest editor of the special issue. So, I will explain how we'll organize the symposium. So we'll have 4 presentations. The second presentation on literature reviews of qualitative research will be made by my co-guest editor, Professor Carlos Larrinaga from University of Burgos. Then we have a presentation on literature reviews, do's and don'ts by Professor Anne-Christine Darcy from Wien University. And finally, last but not least, we'll have a presentation by Professor Andrei Philippe from ESSEC Business School on the use of technology for literature reviews. Okay? So in total, we should have approximately an hour for the 4 presentations, and then we have half an hour to take questions from you. I will begin with general ideas on literature reviews, and I will also give some practical elements about the submission to the issue. So I will tackle a few items. What is a literature review? Takeaway for the reader, the sources of literature reviews, the structure of the literature review, use of tables, various tips, why are literature reviews rejected, and some practical information. One thing is we will post the slides. Well, first of all, the symposium is recorded, but we'll post the slides on the EAA website. So, what is a literature review? First, a literature review, it is not an annotated bibliography, which means it is not a summary of papers in a row. A literature review should focus on a specific concept, well defined. One big difficulty, I must say, is to find a concept which should be not too broad, not too narrow. Too broad literature reviews on financial accounting, okay, that's impossible. But I won't mention specific topics, but if the topic is so narrow that it could be of interest for a very limited number of researchers, then I don't think it's a good literature reviews for our special issue. The literature review should focus on something which seems important in the accounting field. It should identify major trends, that's very important, or patterns, and it should also be critical with past literature, with past work. Finally, it should identify gaps in the literature, so it should contain suggestions for future research. So, what should the reader take away? The reader should take away what are the major achievements, what are the main areas of debate, and what are the outstanding research questions. So, the sources. What are the sources, and should we use all of them? So here I know that this list is debatable because you could disagree or disagree for some of these elements. Journal articles is obvious, books it's obvious. The status of working papers is more debatable, okay? Especially if we speak about rather old, unpublished working papers. Okay, so I think that working papers, unless it's a very recent one, I'm not sure that working papers could be integrated in the literature review. Conference proceeding is the same, but I think there's not the same status. Same for reports, thesis and dissertation, not the same value as journal articles, magazines, newspaper, and online articles. So I would say the first main source could be our journal articles and books. The structure. So the structure, there are of course many possible structures, all right? So I will not give you now one structure. One structure can be chronological, but then the very big risk is the literature review can be very descriptive, which is not good. It can be by theme, which is interesting if they are within one topic, if you have different strands, if you have different subtopics, then that could be interesting. It can be by development of ideas, if for your research topic you have these different stages, and it can be a combination of the above or any other structure, but it must have a structure. So here I give you, I will not read, but I selected a few examples of literature reviews which are organized by theme. So I mean by theme, a subtopic inside one topic. So here that was IFRS adoption, earnings quality, well, that's very well-known reviews, a CSR research, and here management accounting, okay? So these are examples. There are many, many, many good examples of literature reviews and well-organized by topics and subtopics. The tables, I must say that I like tables very much, and I think that tables help a lot in literature reviews. Okay, so why can you use tables? You can use tables to define the key terms, concepts, theoretical perspectives, tables to show the research methods, tables for set of assumptions, sample profiles which have been used, summary of the research results. So there are many, many, many possibilities of having tables. I'm not saying that you should all submit literature reviews with all these tables. I'm sorry, with all. With all these tables, of course not, but these are possibilities. I'm sorry. Okay. So, various tips, various ideas. So, of course, you should identify previous literature reviews on your topic. Okay, that's the minimum, of course. You should cite them, okay, cite them, and explain why you add a contribution compared to these reviews. Expanding the period is not sufficient, okay? If you replicate, do the same, but simply add 5 or 10 years more of papers, I don't think it is sufficient. You should, of course, use extensively all the bibliographic databases which are nowadays available, okay? Nowadays, there is no reason to miss important articles. So here I cited. So thoroughness is important. You should mention the database that you use for your research. You should mention the keywords that you use for your search. For the sake of transparency, very important to know exactly how you did your initial research. One big difficulty, and I know that's maybe a little bit touchy, but some journals are called predatory journals. Okay, some journals are really low quality journals. So of course, it's predatory journals you have lists on the web. But low quality is harder to say. I will not now start to mention some journals, but I have an extensive view of quality journals. Okay, so don't worry. I'm not talking about only 8 journals. For me, A, B, C are very, very good journals. I'm talking about journals really with almost no selection. You pay to get there, and you are published. Okay, so these journals should be avoided in the literature reviews. And sometimes I have received some papers, and sometimes when I look at the references and when I look at some journals, I find it really strange because I know that these journals are really low quality journals. So be careful. Use books. It's harder to find books. Okay, and especially in qualitative research, books are extremely important, and they're harder to find because it's easy to find articles with the databases. So please use books, refer to books if books are relevant for your research topic. Also use a bibliography software because you will probably cite many, many references. So it's very important to be very strict in citation. So use any software. I'm not here to advertise, but you have EndNote, you have Zotero. Zotero is free, EndNote you have to pay, even though it's I think, very cheap. So use a software. Why are literature reviews rejected? So a few ideas. So first reason is are very descriptive linear, so annotated bibliography. Second, the research topic is too narrow. So it can be a good literature review, but on a topic really so narrow that it will not really be of interest for a vast community. Third, the review doesn't include interesting avenues for future research. And fourth, the language. A literature review is often a very qualitative work. It's a text. So the quality should be really there. It's very important to have a good quality of language. And for all the non-native English speakers, and So we have a language copy editor, so we must use that. Okay. So finally, I will give some practical information about the special issue. So again, go back and read the call for papers. With Carlos, we really spent some time to give a lot of elements in the call for papers about what we were expecting, so please read that. The submission deadline, we really didn't want to receive the papers along the year. Just to tell you, the call for papers was released last year in November. The deadline is November this year, and some authors, they misread the call for papers of last year, and they sent some literature reviews last year in November. So these literature reviews were obviously literature reviews waiting for a long time in the drawer, and they found a very good opportunity to use this text, which has been almost dead. Okay? So this is not the type of literature reviews we would like to receive. So for that reason, we decided to have a submission window. So the window will open on November 15th. And when I say open, it means that I will ask the submission website, Scholar One, I will ask them to add the special issue to be available on November 15th until November 30th. And we are very, very strict concerning the ending deadline. Why? Because everyone is informed 1 year in advance. So I mean, if 99% of the authors make the effort to submit before the deadline, I don't see why we should accept papers after the deadline. Okay? So for that reason, there's a submission window. So the lengths, we were discussing the lengths with the associate editors. So the length for first submission is 50 pages, if possible, Times New Roman, Word, double space. Okay? So this relates to the printed version if the paper is accepted. So including printed appendices. On top of that, you can add online appendices. Okay? On top of that, you can add online appendices if you want to give the list of references, a long list of references. If you have a database with hundreds of papers, why not? This can be, not the database, but the list of references can go to the online appendices. Okay, so this is possible. All right? Okay, so your submissions are more than welcome, and good luck for the future. Thank you. Okay, so,
Morning. First, I'd like to thank the European Accounting Association for organizing this symposium, and Hervé and the European Accounting Review for the opportunity to guest edit this special issue. Most of us, we have studied the literature and written literature reviews or review articles, learning from other reviews or our supervisors and from our co-authors. There are excellent article reviews, and some of those are very influential. But the literature on how to do a literature review is quite limited, so I think that this special issue is a good opportunity for contributing in this area. I'd like to take this opportunity to address three issues. First, the interplay between literature reviews and qualitative research. I mean not only how to conduct a literature review of qualitative research, but more generally, I'd like to explore some ideas about how a literature review can be conducted from a qualitative perspective. It is not just a literature review of qualitative research, but a literature review with qualitative research. This is connected to my second point. I'd like to share some ideas about how literature reviews can contribute to theorization. The question I'd like to explore is whether a review article can only aspire to present a state of the art or can go beyond the literature reviewed, producing new insights and new perspectives. Here I will draw on some critical theory ideas. And finally, I'd like to make some remarks about the importance of the reflexivity produced by literature reviews for the assessment of the accounting discipline and its boundaries. So I like to refer first to reviews of qualitative literature, including interdisciplinary studies. I know that there are some risks in this, but for the sake of simplicity, I will make some general comments that I think are valid for both perspectives. I must say that I have very little to offer in terms of recipes on how to do a literature review in this area. To be consistent, reviews of qualitative literature need to be interpretive. I will consider here some how literature reviews of qualitative studies are different from other literature reviews, some ideas of how to do interpretive literature reviews, and the interplay between literature review and field studies in interpretive studies. First, the nature of these literature reviews prevents conducting a kind of statistical analysis that will be inconsistent. The notion of combining or accumulating evidence to reach conclusions through meta-analysis is alien to qualitative research. In contrast, those perspectives see the social sciences in constant reorganization characterized by a multiplicity of directions. The social sciences are in a pre-paradigmatic science from this stage, from this perspective. The system of established categories that would make different findings commensurate is very problematic here. Hermeneutics will say that findings need to be read in the context of each investigation. Foucault will say that the social science is just a body of discourse, and the social sciences are reflexive, and as a society and social science produce new understandings, there is a tendency, from this perspective, to generate unexpected and new processes of change. So society is dynamic and is using new contributions to produce new social changes. In summary, most qualitative, interdisciplinary, and critical researchers would agree that the social sciences are different from the natural sciences in fundamental ways. Following Fliedberg, social studies cannot develop context-independent explanations. So the problem here is that the background conditions are not facts that can be isolated for each article reviewed. The context is something very difficult to handle in reviews of qualitative interdisciplinary literature. Therefore, the sort of literature reviews that are conducted in medicine, for example, to synthesize rigorous knowledge, to assist practitioners and students to find and evaluate knowledge, is something that is very unlikely to be found from this perspective. Second, the essence of qualitative analysis is interpretation and hermeneutics. It is thinking in different ways about what you are reading, trying to go beyond the surface of the argument, go to the origins of a piece of research and theory, and make some other connections that are not expressed in the reviewed article. This process of interpretation would imply a sequence of analysis and synthesis. In the process of analysis, you decompose systematically the reviewed article in its constituent parts, describing how they relate to each other. For example, if you are reviewing literature on the internal process of sustainability reporting based on qualitative interviews, you will need to identify in each paper the theory inspiring the research, the number of interviews conducted, the context of those interviews, as well as the empirical and theoretical insights provided by the investigations. This will generate a number of theories, ideas, arguments, and new insights generated in the fieldwork, and the context will be key element to consider. Synthesis is the process by which this set of theories, ideas, arguments, insights, and context will be connected in a new structure. I propose that it is only by providing a new order to the set of arguments that a review of qualitative studies can make a contribution. Third, from a qualitative perspective, the literature review and the field study are not completely separated. The empirical material in qualitative research is a text, I will say. It can be a document, an interview transcript, a field note. Interpretive work in qualitative research is about interpreting those texts, translating them to another context, identifying and providing relevance to the insight of those texts, and providing a coherent framework that gives a particular understanding or meaning to those texts and potentially to other texts. In this respect, for a qualitative researcher, the literature is just another text that can be analyzed in a similar way. Just to give an example, together with Marta Macias, I'm studying the role of accounting in the emergence of the administrative state in the 16th century. We need to study archival documents, but particularly the scholarly literature on the nature of power published from the 16th century until the 21st century. And we found very difficult to draw a line between primary and secondary sources. For example, the work of the Spanish century writer in the picture, Francisco de Vitoria, is key to understand the nature of power in the administrative state. The notion of providing a new structure to the set of theories, ideas, arguments, insights, and context identified through the analysis of the literature leads me to talk about the relationship between literature reviews and theorization. In coherence with what I said before, I'm not talking here about the natural science ideal of explanation and prediction based on context-independent theories. Rather, I am talking about what Fliedberg called pronesis or to critical theory. Following Albertson and Skolberg, the basis of critical theory is that social science cannot maintain objectivity and neutrality in relation to social phenomena. A central interest in critical theory is how dominant institutions and ideologies are uncritically taken for granted and reproduced in research, and to promote critical reflection and emancipation rather than the reproduction of domination through research. In this regard, literature reviews and review articles are, I think, a central method of research for critical theory because of its central interest on scientific reflexivity. Different authors talk about a process of triple hermeneutics. Simple hermeneutics is a description of the reflexive subjects. Double hermeneutics concern the interpretive work of the social scientist and interested in reproducing and understanding the social interpretation. And the triple hermeneutics involves the critical interpretation of how unconscious processes, ideologies, and power relations in social research contribute to reproduce the status quo. So it is in this regard that critical theory can provide a new structure to the set of theories, ideas, arguments, insights, and context identified through the analysis of the literature. In some way, the method of a critical literature review is problematization. Problematization will consist in turning the theories, the arguments, and the insights analyzed in the literature that seem simple and self-evident into something complex and open, pointing out the open nature of the arguments and inviting to think about different connections between the arguments and insights to produce a different understanding. This exercise of problematization has some requirements, following Swedenborg. On the one hand, it requires reading broadly across different disciplines to get familiar with different theories and to be able to think outside the box imposed by a discipline. Reading a lot of philosophy and social science and social theory. On the other hand, in order to identify something original about a literature review, you will need to have a degree of creativity or high-level intuition skills, as put by Fliedberg, which are indeed very difficult to formalize because, as suggested by Fliedberg, those skills are blocked by the very existence of rules. Finally, finally, I like to comment on something that is in the call for papers for this special issue. Accounting is a new and applied social science discipline. At the same time, there is an explosion of accounting research somehow related to the inclusion of accounting studies in university degrees and the institutional demands for legitimation imposed on the discipline. And up until 20, 30 years ago, there was a limited number of academic journals where an emerging researcher could have reasonable access to the research and ideas published. But with the advent of electronic publishing, the number of accounting journals and accounting publications has increased to a level impossible to manage. Moreover, I think that the transformation of the academic journal has transformed their perception, and the relationship between research journal and the discipline has also changed. I have the feeling that the boundaries of the discipline have changed. For example, accounting research is now published in non-accounting journals, and there is the issue of the predatory journals mentioned by Hervé before, and I have the experience in the EAA scientific committee of receiving many papers without any close to accounting research question. I think that the special issue offers an opportunity to, as explained in the call for papers, explore accounting as a discipline, broadening its scholarship and exploring what is specific to the accounting craft, and to reflect on what research questions can the accounting discipline answer compared to other disciplines. So, in summary, I have explored literature reviews of qualitative research and literature reviews with qualitative research. I have suggested some ideas about the role of literature reviews on theorization by reference to critical theory. And finally, I have mentioned the functionality of this special issue in terms of thinking about the boundaries of accounting research. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here. It's my first try to use my voice for the last 2 days, so hopefully it will work out the next 10 minutes. And I'm very happy and thank Evie for the opportunity to share some of the ideas, what is a good or bad literature review. And it's not normative when I say do's and don'ts, it's just to share my experiences and just to help a little bit out what we might expect from a good literature review, because I had the opportunity to be an editor for a journal that is a management, not an accounting journal, that publishes literature reviews, so I've seen and edited some of them, and last year I've published a literature review in accounting, so this is the type of idea I want to share with you. So I'm not going into the detail of this journal, that's not the purpose, it's just showing you that the idea we've already heard, what a good review is doing, so the do's of a literature review is a very common theme independently of accounting or under other topics. So here we have seen, okay, we have heard of the major lines of research. I could add it should be well balanced. If you have major lines, have a look at all of the lines usually, or make a decision which line is more important and explain why. And we are looking for new and novel cross-connections and innovative and critical evaluation. That's very general, and I'm not going more into detail of this, but if I look at my own try, and this is always, if you come as an editor and you have pretty ideas what is good and bad, but then you're asked to put it into your own writing, it's always a challenge, I have to admit. So I had the opportunity with the wonderful Antarka to do a literature review on goodwill accounting, and we saw we had a lot of decisions to make. And I just invite you to make the decisions very explicit in advance. Where to start, which timeline is interesting, and it's very challenging to go too far into the past because journals are different, topics are different, so really make a sound decision on this. For us it was super easy because we anchored on other literature reviews, and there we anchored on the post-implementation review of the ISB, so the timeline was pretty clear. If you're thinking of a financial accounting topic, sometimes the accounting standard provides you the opportunity to make a sound decision on the timeline. Also, it's a big question when to stop. Of course, we have heard that the deadline is pretty clear. However, you will see when you always look what's happening, and you have a very interesting topic, there might always come new papers out, but you have to work in it, understand it, read it, so you also have to decide on this. More important is the scope and the special focus. For example, we really decided, and we had many decisions, discussions on it, that we look on implementation effects and cross-country differences, and these has implications. Because if you look at cross-country differences, you must more go into international journals. Perhaps it's not sufficient just to look at the US journals, and then your journals must be different. So this all has implications, and I really invite you to have a very good look on this. Also, you might start with some of the decisions, and you will find out it's good to change your decision over time, what also might be another issue. We have already heard a lot about scope and contribution. I just picked 3 sentences from review letters I've received advising to reject. So it is possible that somebody wants to explain the world, and this is also, we had the example that it's too narrow, the scope. It can happen that you want to explain too much. It's also perhaps not feasible for a review. So there's an example of enforcement of financial reporting, and then it's enforcement in the US, internationally, enforcement by about different topics and so on. So it seemed to be too much for a review, and then makes life for the authors very difficult. If you are looking at accounting standards, but you do not look into the debate on the accounting standards, perhaps you might miss a point in your motivation and contribution, even if the review is just on reviewed papers. And last but not least, if you then look at the outcome of your own research, what is your contribution, just to have very, very general ideas of research areas, it's not sufficient. Really, we have the idea that there's much more specific to say, well, I have identified a gap, we still don't know what really earnings management is, please provide new ideas on earnings management. This would be not like a thing that is sufficient. You should be more specific in this regard. I just went through some of the review letters and looked at. The first thing I really see too often is that it's not well documented each step, how you picked the papers you later discuss. It's really not good to say we analyze the most important papers or whatever. You really should be very explicit what you do and what you don't, and you might have brilliant reasons for this. Just make it available to the reviewer and later to the reader to assess what you've really already done. Sounds easy. I would say half of the paper haven't done this properly, so it's always a very thing. One part of the documentation is which range of journals are you considering. So, and it's not about just using A+, Evie has said this already, it really depends to your topic. I've just seen a literature review on digitalization in an accounting and auditing environment, what is of course a very interesting topic, but the literature review was just on covering A+ journals in accounting, and surprise, surprise, there were not many papers. So it really depends. So if you're interested in this, you have to consider perhaps other journals cover better this type of topic, and so adapt your range of journals really, really tied to your very specific research question. Even if you think of the research string, very, very trivial things like diversity in rating. If you're looking for amortization and you miss the string, that there might be UK journals that write it differently than US journals, and by this reason in the search engine you just miss some important papers. We have seen all these types of little issues. Vice versa, if you use, of course, search engines, and you should, otherwise it's no way to find everything, then the biggest work is to exclude everything what is not relevant, because you find more than you want. And you might find like book reviews, editorials, comments might be relevant or not. You have to look at it. And even, for example, we decided in our literature review just to look on empirical evidence. So if you talk about accounting standards, you will probably find also some normative papers or discussions. And, but we were interested in the empirical evidence, so we excluded all other research designs, very different to the other qualitative research designs. There it would be different. So also this should be very well documented, what we really did and how you excluded it. So the criteria for manually excluding are crucial, just put it in, and very often it's totally unclear. And the quality assessment is also key. It's not about just A+. I've already seen very often just one journal ranking is used, might be appropriate. My learning is many journal rankings are biased. If you're a UK journal ranking, perhaps not all the perhaps important Asian Pacific journals are included, and vice versa. So we have combined 3 different ones just to make sure that we include all relevance for our type of intervention. You see, these are not big issues, but in addition, you might have a better quality in doing so. So we have heard already so much of structuring. There are many, many ways, and I'm not going into detail how we finished. We tried to develop a model of the use of the accounting standard, what is the input, what are influences, as we looked at international evidence, we looked at country-level influences, main variables, and firm-level influences. We looked at the action, how are the accounting standards we look at really applied, and then we had another perspective on the output, and we were able to line up our 47 articles and make sure we can then position in our framework. And I do believe this is helpful. This is just an example how it could be done. Our very first idea was to have a meta-analysis. We hear later about this, but it was not possible. At least we provided a type of a structure to be able to follow all of the ideas. And just two last don'ts or warnings I've seen. The one warning is to follow the author-centric concept. It might be very often there, like in some chapters of the dissertation, might be a nice starting point for literature review, but it's not finalizing it. So it should be a concept-centric type of idea you follow. That's the first warning. The second is, if you are very, very familiar then with the literature, because you read this all in detail, you just try to think, oh, this is trivial, I know this is not well done, the technique is wrong, blah, blah, blah. That's all perhaps the case. And I just picked something I find it very nice. It's even from 1985, you see, I believe it's still valid. We are not so much interested in your personal critique on all the old stuff. Previous work is always vulnerable, it's really true, but this is not the point. The point is, that is too easy criticizing. It's really important to explain how this research builds up on previous findings and indicate what are future research. So you can write this first down, and in the last session you just cross it out, because it's not the point to be too critical with the old stuff. And I think this is a fair warning in this regard. So my learning is, it first looks a little bit easier, but all the challenges you have for a research paper applies fully to a literature review. And so it faces the comparable challenges as other types of research. And still here, motivation contribution is a key term, so it should be clear from the beginning. That's the thing you don't change, but exact scope and search strategy could be changed over time. So we have rewritten, as all research papers are rewritten, I don't know how many times. We had 3 rounds of mainly rewritten our paper. And you should really then know when to stop, because you could go on forever, and you shouldn't, because we have this very clear deadline. So I wish you really good luck, and we are looking forward to see many very nice and good literature reviews. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much first, the European Accounting Review, for allowing me to share my thoughts about what I think about the literature reviews. And we have seen some very nice presentation, and it is a bit tough to come at the end, because I'm going to repeat one part of the things that my colleagues have said just before. And what am I going to talk today? I'm going to talk today about what is perceived at a certain lack of rigor in traditional literature reviews. And basically I'm going to talk about the modern techniques that have been are out there and that people are actually using in addressing this type of literature reviews. So I'm going to talk basically about some bibliometric references, bibliometric methods, and I'm going to talk about, as Anne said, about the meta-analysis and the last advancements in meta-analysis. But before we start, I would like to start with a quote that I actually discovered, and I actually like it so much. It's if I have seen Father, it is by standing on the shoulders of the giants. And when they said it, the authors, Newton, basically first said it, it was he was referring to the giant shoulders of all that literature reviews, all that previous authors that have actually expressed some great ideas in the literature. And I want you to think a little bit about how did Newton, at that time, actually did a literature review. And if you think at that time, going back some centuries ago, if you really wanted to go to do a literature review, you had to go in a different city, travel in a different and look at the original manuscripts in different types of cities. And this has dramatically changed in the last centuries, and especially in the last decades, in the last years, when all this modern technology and all the internet and all this, on one click you have access to incredible sources of references out. And all this is basically maybe in one way has made us thinking about maybe we should structure our ideas differently, and maybe we should structure the way we do literature reviews as well. And I'm thinking before I start looking more into specifics, I just want to highlight what Hervé was saying, and my previous colleagues mentioned before. At least from my point of view, a literature review is a research paper. And when I say that it is a research paper, I'm saying that personally when I'm looking at the literature review, I do expect a research question with a gap in the literature. I do expect that literature review to bring a contribution to the literature, to see exactly what is new. I do expect some tension. Otherwise, it's I know, for instance, that value relevance we have, they are linked. I do expect some tension. I do expect some tension in such a literature review. And I do expect some findings of the literature reviews that we can take basically out. And I think that this should be the general message, whatever type of literature review we're doing. Whether we're doing a qualitative literature review, whether we're doing a different traditional type of literature review, or whether we're doing what I'm calling modern type of literature reviews. Again, for me, and I want to emphasize from the beginning, bibliometric reviews and meta-analysis, they are just tools. They are tools that we are using in order to try to contribute to the literature and to show something out. And why these tools have been developed? They have been developed for what I'm calling like a perceived lack of rigor in the traditional literature reviews. And what I mean by lack of rigor, at the end of the day, yes, we're looking, but at the end of the day, it is our choice what articles are we actually talking about, like in the literature reviews, what points of view are we going to like emphasize a little bit more. And this is why like there are some tools that have been developed to be a little bit more like rigorous. But again, from my point of view, they are only tools, and I'm going to talk about two tools, about the bibliometric reviews and about the meta-analysis. What are bibliometric reviews? They have been developed like in the past years, and they became more and more like systematic. And it's a systematic, transparent and reproducible. And I do emphasize, and I repeat, reproducible. The idea like in a bibliometric like reviews is that everything unmentioned a little bit before, when you're looking at the articles, you should clearly point out the steps. So everybody, you can redo it and get the same results as it is. And this bibliometric type of reviews have been became more popular in the last years, and they have certain type of steps, traditional steps that are like in the same time. And if I'm looking at the steps, like first you look like at the database, more databases, try to search like what type of journals. You define the key terms with pros and cons, like in this type of key terms. You manually examine all the entries and clean up the data set, which is actually the difficult part in this part like of bibliometric reviews. And traditionally, like researchers have like looked at these results and started like doing all kind of like descriptive statistics and simply like looking like by research grouping the results and showing the results, trying to identify some trends by looking basically at the research methodology, from where are actually the studies coming from, by country, by period, geographical area, by journal, or by author. So this is basically like a rough image of what is actually done like in bibliometric reviews. I tried to identify a little bit some, again, it's lack of rigor. I selected some articles that I think that are like missing like in each type of like of a group. And if you look like they sometimes in our area, I think that there are more developed bibliometric reviews and more high quality bibliometric reviews basically in management. But actually, like even in accounting, you have some types of like reviews that have done. And I grouped them basically like the three ways that it is. They either focus on like on some accounting topics, about like accounting subdisciplines or such methods. And here like actually like you have more like in management accounting, probably because it's more influenced by management. But strangely enough, like I see that I've not seen so many like financial accounting. I've seen like, I was surprised for instance even myself, like a bibliometric review for instance on earnings management, which is one of the most popular topic. I've not seen like something like this that has been developed like in this part like out. Then you have like, again, one interesting part, like you can focus it on different regions, and can get something like about like in international setting and to see like certain differences and certain trends that are developing. And you have like some reviews that have been like focused like on North America, for instance, on Europe or in German-speaking countries, like all kinds of focus that have been developed. Or sometimes like this type of reviews have been used basically to think about the way our academia is like actually like organized. And you have like a certain trend of types of reviews that have been basically focusing on what we're doing and on the way like citations and all this type of things that have been actually impacted. What's up next, like after this type of literature reviews? I believe that the literature is basically going and this type of trend towards what it is called like a framework of a structured literature review. And you have like, for instance, like a nice framework about when you start with something like this. Again, it's a tool, it's an entry point. When you go and like identify, you do all these statistics. And what I like is at the end, actually, like the goal of this structured literature frameworks is not only like to stop, this is it, like try to identify like, okay, what are the gaps in the literature and what are basically the whole goal of this exercise is to identify eventually like future questions, research questions that can be actually approached and seen like in the literature. Meta-analysis, the second time that has been developed in the recent years, like basically out. And again, meta-analysis is coming something same as bibliometric references. It's coming actually something from that we have borrowed from like medicine and evidence-based medicine, and that's where actually we looked. And what is meta-analysis actually doing? is like basically grouping together and combining, synthesizing like basically the results of previous papers and basically archival papers out. And if you look like, it's a modern technique and it's nice because it has like, it's having a bigger population, so the results are basically stronger. It does allow like sometimes to find the tension when you have like some results going in one direction and the other results going in another direction. It allows like in a way to draw a conclusion like where are we actually going well like with the literature. It allows as well like to explain some variation in results like in between the study, and what I like it very much is like it allows like a certain like to address a certain what is called the publication bias. We know that journals are basically going more for significant results, so going more for the stars. We know that sometimes we try some tests, we don't get the results, and we put that in a drawer, and that's called like the file drawer problem, and the meta-analysis can actually empirically address this type of issue and decide like whether it is and what it is. And this is the file drawer problem, and that's a big advantage of meta-analysis what's to. What is meta-analysis actually doing? It's trying to combine an effect size, to find an effect size out of it, and to combine like this type of effect like from several studies that have been done previously in the literature. And when I'm talking about this effect size, and I'm going to emphasize here, there's a challenge and there's basically like a certain type of difficulty, because most of the meta-analysis that we've seen basically are based on bivariate correlations. So most of the researchers, they're actually looking at the correlation table and they are picking the coefficient in the correlation table. And most of the research are like looking at these bivariate correlations. However, philosophically, what we do in archival research, we're actually having like regressions. Most of us were using regressions, and we're looking like all the other control variables. Well, the key question, and I'm puzzled, like why are we looking at this bivariate correlations without all those control variables? So I believe, and there are some modern techniques now that have been developed that are actually looking at partial correlations. So actually we should take into account the coefficient from the regressions and not necessarily the correlations that we have like in our correlations table out. When we do some meta-analysis, and I think that this corresponds to what my colleagues said just before, we do have some certain traps, the traditional traps that we can publish. Like one of the trade-offs that we have to decide is should we look at published or unpublished papers? Herbert was mentioning it. What's the quality of the results that we want to put it in? And it's nice because in meta-analysis we can actually do some weights, put some weights. So the rankings that you're using, for instance, like a 5-star, we could put like 5 times, while a 1-star, 1 time, a certain weight to influence like the quality of the results. And ideally it should be like independent samples. And another problem is like, what are we focusing on? Are we focusing on exactly the same measure, or are we focusing like on different performance as a concept, like defined out of it or so? What it is, like what are the steps basically in this type of like meta-analysis? You compute basically a combined effect, like starting with a coefficient or with the correlations like from individual studies, and you look at the significance of this coefficient. Is it significant overall? It's very important that you're looking like at sometimes like at outliers, the influence of outliers in this type of studies, and basically you compute what's called the fail-safe net, N. And this is very nice, what I like. It's simply in a way like it's giving you the power, and it's saying like the number of studies that are like basically not published in order to cancel the significance of the coefficient. So how many studies would you have, like would we need basically with a non-significant result to make this overall coefficient like disappear like in our sample? So it's basically like a strength, like how well it is or so. In meta, when we're computing basically in the next step, once we have computed all this like individual thing, we can approach it like in a next step in what is called the meta regression. So we're taking this individual like size effect, and then we can regress it basically on authorship, on industry, on things that are based like, and try to determine, for instance, if we have a bias like in publication, institution, or things like this, by regressing this coefficient on different types of determinants that are basically driving in and see. And this is basically like the meta regression that are more and more developed now and trying to look a little bit in the literature. if I'm looking a little bit like I looked at, there are numerous meta-analyses that are going. One thing that I noticed is like, again, for the time being, I've not seen, with some exceptions, some working papers going on. Most of the meta-analysis that I've seen in accounting are actually only focusing on the correlations. One exception, sorry. I'm reverse the slides. One exception that I have seen actually is basically in the first study, the meta-regression, where they are actually like looking at the coefficients and not so much at the correlation. There are some studies in accounting that have been done already, like when they are looking at the correlations, and for instance, they are looking at audit fees in corporate governance, in IFRS effect, and there are more and more like meta-analysis that are coming in, to the point that there is even a nice review of all the meta-analysis that have been actually done in the literature. So a review of the reviews of this type of things. However, one point that I noticed, and I placed it in red a little bit, and maybe it's a little bit of hint, I don't know like what EAR is searching, I have seen very few reviews like basically focusing on the coefficients out, like, and not focusing on the coefficient and not on the correlations, like the bivariate correlations. I go backwards, there's a decision chart, and basically like when you do a meta-analysis in one way, you can go like step by step and basically go and identify, and what's important is to do type of like sensitivity test and try to see like split the sample according to C and see like if the results hold in an international sample or if they hold like in what it is or so. Technical things, there's an excellent blog hosted by the RSC, and we are at the EAA, so the RSC, it's a very good blog on the technical issues, and you have like basically an Excel-based tool as well, who's like helping you like with the technical things and how to compute this coefficient, so it's like helping like automatically out. And you have like a very nice synthesis of the empirical archival studies in accounting, the way it is like, it's giving very good tips on like this type of meta-analysis technically, how we do it out. What's up next? And again, we should maybe look like more in medicine and in other areas that we have actually like, they are in front of us like from this point of view. And there is a debate that is actually going on and is supported basically like in a blog like that is very, very interesting. And actually the argument, what they are arguing against automatic literature reviews. So maybe we should drop up this literature reviews in what we're having like in our papers when we were writing the paper, and their argument is basically that literature reviews are like kind of biased. We should automate this type of literature reviews, and journals should automate and put them on the table and available at one click. Like when you're drawing one click, it should actually go like and show like this type of meta-analysis and type of results what it is. And what am I talking about? Like what exactly it is? We're talking about like this type of clusters and clouds, and they are dynamic. And it would be very nice. I can imagine a study like this, for instance, like for determinants of earnings management, when you simply go and pick up like one determinant, and it's showing like all the types of links that have been showed like in the literature before, like with what determinants of earnings management are. And this is basically like a look in the future when we're going to have like maybe like dynamic journals that allow like this type of literature reviews in the future. I think that would be it. Thank you very much and good luck.
Okay. Thank you very much to Carlos and André for the presentations. So now we are absolutely on time. That's wonderful. So we have half an hour to take questions. So I don't know. So maybe there is a mic. No?
Thank you. My name is Nazim, and I am from University of Groningen. I was reading the call of literature review by EAR, but is meta-analysis part of this call? First thing. Secondly, you mentioned that there are some predatory journals and there are some low-quality journals which you do not want to see. But the meta-analytical techniques, they ask you to include everything, whatever is available. Otherwise, there is a problem of publication bias. So you cannot trust those results unless you deal with the publication bias. So what do you say about this?
Okay, so first of all, yes, meta-analyses are included in the scope of the call. I forgot to mention, but I think it's when you read the call, it's clear, and I can repeat now. We welcome every type of literature review. Okay, qualitative, quantitative, financial accounting, management accounting, anything, if it's related to accounting. All right, so that's clear. We welcome reviews on topics. We welcome reviews on methods. All right, we do not favor anything. So I really want to insist, and that's a good opportunity to say it. We can handle, I think we are a diverse team, and that's a good thing. So we can handle any type of submission. Okay. Now concerning your second question, or second half of the question, the concept of high quality journal or low quality journal, I said it's a difficult concept. I have a very, very broad opinion about quality journals. Okay, so I absolutely don't have a restrictive view of quality. The problem is, again, sometimes I received, during my term, I received submissions, and some journals, I never heard the name, or some journals are Journal of Accounting Research and something. Okay, so, you have many of them, all right? So, what I do when I want to explain, I don't want to be brutal, to be rude, but when I want to explain the things to the authors, personally, I use a lot the ranking, the list. It's not a ranking, the list given by the ABS. Okay, ABS. I have an Excel file. It's a very, very comprehensive list. I don't pay attention to the ranking. I pay attention to the presence or the absence in this list. Okay, which means that I'm very, very open-minded concerning the ranking. If it's not in the list, very, very bad point. Then I can go to other, if you take Scopus as a very, very broad coverage. So I take very comprehensive rankings and coverages. And if a journal is absent in one or even more of these ranking list coverages, it's really, for me, it's a sign of low quality, and it should not be included in any analysis, in any review. Yeah.
My name is Chin Liang Tang, from Western Sydney University, Australia. First of all, thank you very much for your very useful comments. And also, I think it's the idea of special issue for accounting literature review is very good. And because appears in the top journals not published literature review paper very often. So I think it's very, very good idea, and it's particularly useful for the PhD students and the new researcher in particular area. So there's so many papers, so many research studies. So if we need systematical and literature review, and that's quite good. My question is first, I think you mentioned, and the contribution, meta contribution. So the question is, literature review is basically second-hand, okay, and it's not original, the study. So therefore, how you assess the contribution of the literature review? Because if that's an original research paper, you can assess the original ideas and the theories and methodologies. But for the literature review paper, so I'm just wondering how you expect the contribution from the literature review. My second question is,
We don't hear you. I think that there's a problem with the mic.
okay. Okay.
Okay. Maybe Carlos can answer the question.
Thank you. My second question is, as you mentioned, and now the accounting research is interdisciplinary. So everything is connected with each other. Therefore, what is the scope and the boundary of a particular accounting literature review? How you define the scope and the papers that should be included, excluded. Another question is about
I'm sorry. You asked two, so if you don't mind, we will answer the first two
That's
questions.
okay. Yeah, okay.
So I understand your first question is how to identify a contribution in a literature review compared to the previous. I can provide just a general answer. I think that it's very specific to each study, but I will say that summarizing or just reflecting, reproducing the findings of, and I'm talking more about qualitative research, reproducing the findings of the literature review is not a contribution. I would say that you need to provide something new, a new structure, a new understanding, a new understanding that is produced by the analysis of this literature. So I don't know if this is a... And your second question was how to define the boundaries of accounting.
Yes.
Scope.
Boundaries, yeah.
I think that this is to me an open issue because I have been doing research in sustainability accounting, and sustainability accounting is a subject that is probably in the boundaries of accounting as generally conceived. So this is problematic, and what I suggested in my presentation is that this special issue is an opportunity to explore those boundaries. Sometimes I have the feeling that some papers that are, I mentioned also, submitted to the conference are not addressing any accounting or are addressing questions that I see more closer to other fields. So, there is this tension. I like to enlarge, I would like to see interdisciplinarity in accounting research, but at the same time, probably there are questions that are better answered in other fields than in accounting.
I don't know if you want to add something on contribution or okay. Okay, so we can take another question. Over there.
My name is Piotr Staszkiewicz from Warsaw School of Economics. I would like to get your idea about definition of the scope of the literature review in respect how you make sure that a selection of the papers for any particular literature review is complete.
First answer would be that nowadays we have bibliographic databases which are extremely powerful. So concerning journal articles, so unfortunately excluding books, but concerning journal articles nowadays, really it's very hard to miss a paper if you combine the databases. okay? Then it depends how you work. Personally, I always start with Business Source Complete, and then I go to some other databases, all right? So with journal articles, you have keywords, you can really make a very efficient and powerful search with databases. Okay, so I don't really see a problem. Now there's a problem with the scope of the journals. So should you take accounting journals or should you take other journals? Of course, it depends on your topic. It depends on your topic. But for many topics, if you take accounting journals, finance journals, if you take some business strategy journals, you will cover the field. All right. So I'm not really concerned by a big problem with journal articles, given the tools we have. I'm more concerned with the books, because the books are really important for some research topics. For qualitative research, management accounting, management control, sociology, books are really important. And then it's much harder to find books. I mean, books, we don't have bibliographic databases with books, okay? We have Google Books, which helps a lot, okay? But sometimes you are lucky and you find the good excerpts in Google Books. Sometimes you are unlucky and you don't find the good excerpts, all right? So otherwise you must go to the library, but that's harder. So depending on your topic, you should really, for some topics, you should really make a very big effort with books. So I think that's an answer. I don't know if you want to add? No. Okay.
Yeah, it works. So I'm Andrea Morar-Barfira, ESSEC Business School. I have a question for Anne, actually. So I was just curious if you can expand a little bit about your experience, I mean, from both the editor side, but also from the author side, concerning the inclusion of the working papers in a literature review. Because I think it's a little bit tricky, right? We have working papers that are, from top schools, but then working papers for, from other schools, and then different bunch of authors, different bunch of subjects. And then at the end of the day, I was just curious to see from particularly from your editor experience, right? Do you get a lot of papers that include working papers? And if you do, what kind of working papers, from what sources, what kind of, criteria those papers are used, and so on and so forth? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. It's really a tricky one. For our own, we decided not to take working papers because the quality check is so demanding. However, I have to admit, we then cited two that we found important, but we said, okay, it's out of our general database, but we think it's important. If you have a very recent topic, all the digitalization topics and stuff, there are so many working papers out, I guess. It depends on your research question. I've seen, like, when it's more which new streams in research do evolve, then perhaps you can use SSRN or also as a database to find out, just as a type of, nowadays we have, I don't know, a percentage of new papers is on this new topic, just to find out if this new topic is coming out, but not to use the results of these papers, because we have no guarantee at all how they will end up. So the quality check cannot be done, but I guess if you want to get a feeling about new topics coming up, it's still reasonable to use it. So you are right, it's a mixture of considerations in this regard. So I've seen some, but actually I also, as an editor, went back, say they have just picked randomly some. It's not randomly, because they picked the working papers with names we are well aware of. That's a little bit the quality check. But it seems not a systematic approach, if you want. And we want to have, I always appreciated a systematic approach. So, long sentences, short answer. If it's more to find a tendency, I would say why not? To go into the results and say these are like this is full research. It's really difficult.
I'm Mieke Jans, Hasselt University. I have a very practical question. Do you have already an idea if you receive like 50 really high quality literature reviews?
Okay, so yes, that's we can hope, we can wish. Yes, we can pray. Anyway, okay, the in theory, a special issue, well, any journal issue has between 7 and 8 articles published, depending on the length of each article. Okay, because we have a constraint with the page number, right? So in principle, the target is 7, 8, all right. However, we already agreed with, because this process will take time. You will submit in November, then we'll send a review process. We'll have first answer in spring, and then second round, etc. So next year will be a new editor, my colleague Professor Beatriz Garcia-Osma. So we already discussed with her, and she agreed very easily that if we really have higher number than 7, 8 of really good reviews, then she agreed that we could that the special issue could be spread over 2 issues. Okay. Now, if we really have a very big number, but if we decide we can't have 3 issues or 4 issues, okay, we can't have the whole journal on literature reviews. So then some good reviews, but maybe a little bit lower, or maybe with a topic a little bit too restrictive, but still very good reviews, then could be published as regular papers. So not in the special issue. But we don't want to lose them. I mean, if they are good, if the review process, if the outcome is positive, we can't say the author is too bad. Okay, so that's what we plan to do now, but of course we will see. We will see.
Thank you. I have a very pragmatic question. What will you do if you get 2 submissions on the same topic, like, accounting and agriculture or some such topic? How will you deal? Or should potential authors be querying, I'm thinking of doing this?
Okay. Okay, so we haven't discussed, the 2 of us, so that's only my reaction. I would say that I wouldn't find very good to publish 2 reviews on the same topic. Okay, so we have two solutions. If one is really better than the other one, or if one is not good, then the case is solved. If the 2 are good, but we probably pick the best. Okay, that's what we consider the best based on reviews. Okay, based on evaluations, because of course, well, I didn't say it, but everything is based on the regular review process at EAR. Okay, so I think in that case we will pick the best, and if really we have 2 good ones, so maybe the second one we will publish as a regular paper. Do we have other questions? Yeah, okay. Ask for the mic. I'm sorry.
Well, my question is this time regarding the meta-analytical methodology, because I'm actually working on meta-analysis now, and I was intended to submit to EAR, and that's like, now as you mentioned, that there are very few, and I have seen actually there are very few based on the partial correlation. So what is your preference? Is the bivariate correlation or partial correlation?
Okay, so André, what is your preference for partial correlation or
bivariate correlation?
bivariate correlation. Bivariate. Partial or bivariate?
Obviously.
Everything falls down.
What happened with your microphone?
Okay. So obviously, I think that from my out, it's like we should move into partial correlations, because what we know, like at univariate statistics, we don't even look at like in the usual papers. So obviously, it's superior. Like from my point of view, like and I was puzzled when I looked. I was like, at most of the meta-analysis, I was like, why are we looking basically in this type of like univariate correlations? Because the relationship can change, and actually like that's a nice source of tension. This can change, and maybe some results are different if we're looking more at like partial correlations. And we know, at least in archival research, we focus on regressions, and that's actually where we're looking at. So I found it strange that in normal regression settings, we're looking at the coefficients, and when we're making the step towards meta-analysis, we're looking actually like at bivariate correlations, which goes back. So I think we should go, that's a little bit a hint, we should go in that direction a little bit. If the hint was not obvious.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but you had a third question, so I stopped you, but now we have a few minutes, so if you want to ask your third question, then...
I almost forget the question. I can have another question.
The fourth one, maybe.
Yeah, my question may be something like that. When we read the literature review, maybe 100 papers, maybe 200 papers, that's the scope of the literature review. So my question is, I think you have mentioned, try to avoid the criticism. But we have to make our comments. We have to make our interpretation. Maybe we don't agree with the literature. So what we should express our opinion in a most acceptable way. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so question is about criticism. How far can we go into criticism?
I must say I had also rejected too, because the criticism was a type of an ideological theme. If you look at accounting streams, like if you go into the critical perspectives in accounting, and people have like political dimensions of reasonings, so they damn a whole stream of literature, then I would say this is not acceptable, and I have seen such drafts. If you believe, and this is also true, if you go very far back into accounting research, and of course our technique has evolved a lot, and we know like 20 years ago the technique were different. Simple example, you all have the regressions, and they had no fixed effects. So they were nothing controlling for year and firm fixed or whatever. There are good reasons to believe that the 20-year-old results are not as important nowadays for the same research question as perhaps the newer papers. And but I believe there are ways to write this down. Yeah, that my topic in my slide was not so much not to critique. We should critique. We should show this is not solved. So this we should solve in the future. That's a major part of our contribution. So this type of critique, it's more than appreciated. But it's not just to pointing how he was not able to do fixed effects model also. So there is more the writing style demanded, I would say. So please be critical and find really your contribution by posting where are the gaps we have still to fill.
Okay, so I think that we had no more questions. I think that we can end the symposium. So first of all, I would like to thank André, Anne, and Carlos for the presentation. I would like to thank you for your attendance, your questions. I wish you a good luck for your work, for your submissions, and please remember, no submission before November 15th. Thank you. Goodbye.
admire you.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. I like to work with friends. I'm highly motivated.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was very good. No,
Thank you very much.
Respecting time. No,
It was a little bit too much for me, so I tried.
Sorry.
Donc j'essaie de sauter.
I'm sorry.